Chris Rapley. I'm Professor of Climate Change at University College London, and I'm Director of the Science Museum. I have to say it's quite difficult to tell. Firstly, the media is a slightly lossy communications mechanism, and I'm not directly involved myself. And I'm of two minds. It's clear that a great deal of important talking is going on. It's clear that there's a fabulous opportunity because the relatively new US regime under President Obama is very well served by the best scientific advice in the world, that there is a level of commitment there to finding a solution that we haven't had for at least the last decade. We hear both good news and bad news from China, and in the end it's what America and China do that will largely dictate whether the outcomes are what we need. But then on the other hand we hear that there are still 2,000 square brackets, unresolved bits of text in the agreement that they're trying to forge, and it's sort of inconceivable that they could really deal with all of those in the remaining time. What I would like to see is the following, that even if they cannot get the exact commitments signed off in Copenhagen now, better that they then agree the process by which they will, hopefully over the next few months or at most a year, rather than fudge it and have something that doesn't deliver what we need. And I think that's a general view that you hear around, but there are still glimmers of hope. There are still people out there, on the negotiating teams who think that it's feasible to get this done. The way I like to think of Copenhagen is of 190 nations or thereabouts sitting around a table with a very large heap of carbon in front of them, whether that's in terms of coal, oil or gas, it doesn't matter. But if we just take a round figure, 500 billion tons more to burn and release into the atmosphere. If we could do better than that, that would be great. But 500 billion is about the limit. There's an optimistic note in that we've burned 500 billion, and that happened just recently. The 500 billion mark was passed, so we've constructed the entire modern world on 500 billion tons, so there's a lot you can do with that 500 billion. At the rate that we're burning it at present, we've only got about another 30-40 years to go. But somehow or another we need, after we've burned that, to have managed to provide ourselves with the energy supply we need to support in a decent form of well-being half as many more people on the planet than there are today, and that's quite a challenge. How do you use that pile of carbon to achieve that? You've got to do three things with it: achieve greater global equity, keep the wheels on existing Western society, and invest in the new technologies and new social expectations, structures, behaviours that will allow us to be sustainable into the future. It's a very tough thing to do, and if you try and do the numbers, as David Mackay has done, you find that it's very difficult to make them add up. On the other hand, as Director of the Science Museum, I see plenty of evidence that the technological capacity is out there in the human population, so the issue is, can we marshal it and deploy it in time? Well, the word geoengineering covers a number of individual topics, and it's unfortunate that they're lumped together. If by geoengineering we mean applying some sort of huge scaled up technological band-aid to compensate for the problem that we're creating by releasing so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, then I am extremely nervous and negative about it. I really don't think that we understand this complex system sufficiently to exactly compensate by sunshades or whatever it is the problems that we're generating through enhancing the greenhouse effect. On the other hand, if by geoengineering we mean remediating the atmosphere, that is, developing the technology for being referred to as artificial trees that would suck the 4 molecules of carbon dioxide out of the 10,000 molecules of air and pump them both in an energy efficient and cost efficient way back into the ground, then that would seem to me to be something absolutely admirable and something we should be putting a great deal of effort into. So depending on what you mean by geoengineering, I'm either totally against or totally for. It seems to me that you can divide society into three. I mean, we can do it lots of ways, but if we divide them this way, we can think of individuals. We can think of our, in our case, democratically elected leadership. In other cases, they're less democratically elected, but they're still the leadership. And you can think of the big corporations and industry. And no one of these can arrive at the solution, particularly because you've got to have a global, worldwide effort, so you need some level of international coordination. So it seems to me that the following is true. Individuals can certainly play an important role. It's absolutely clear that we can adjust our expectations, we can adjust the way we live. For example, I recently became a vegetarian on the basis that that was the easiest way for me to make a significant reduction in my carbon footprint, because I'd analysed my carbon footprint, discovered there wasn't much I could do about my yearly commute to and from work other than to give up work, which I wasn't prepared to do, that an awful lot of my carbon footprint was embodied in the packaging of materials of things that I bought, and although I can try, it's quite hard for me to have a big impact on that, but I could stop eating meat, which has embodied in it very large amounts of water and energy that aren't necessary. So that, you know, individuals can play a role. We can also play a role in the way we vote and the way that we influence the organisations that we're employed by to behave. So, for example, as Science Museum Director, I've been happy to commit the Science Museum to reducing its carbon emissions by 10% next year. We don't know quite how we're going to do it, but the staff are on for this. They're very engaged, they're very enthusiastic to do it. I'm very hopeful that we will do it. So there are lots of ways individuals can play a role. Clearly, governments have got to play a big part in this, not just through their leadership on these big issues, because they're complicated and that, you know, somebody needs to take the leadership, but they're the only agent by which the international negotiations can be completed, so they're our agents and instruments in that respect. But also they're the facilitators for major infrastructure, like a new form of electricity grid, or deciding on what the UK's energy mix should be and so on. So, you know, that's a role for government. Finally, of course, they set the legislative framework in which all the rest of us operate. So if they make something illegal, like emitting large amounts of carbon, then, you know, that has a big impact on the future of humanity. But in the end, it's the corporations, like it or not, who have probably the biggest influence on the future, because they have the financial capital, the intellectual capital, and the means of delivery to actually shape the future that we will all find ourselves in 10, 20, 30 years' time. So it's the, you know, it's the Coca-Colas, it's the Tesco's, it's the Shells, it's the, you know, the Sonys, you name it, it's them. And decisions being made by their directors and their boards on what services they'll provide, what infrastructure they provide, what products they provide, what they persuade us to spend our money on. They're the people who will shape the future to a very great degree. So it seems to me that having all three recognise that they're in the same boat, none of them demonised by any of the others, and all working collaboratively to find the solution, is actually the only way that we'll get to where we need to be. I'm quite concerned that the whole economic system in which we operate and have operated for some time is based largely on the rather base human instinct of greed, which is a very powerful way of driving human affairs, but in the end, if it implies material growth and infinite material growth, then I fear that Malthus may have been delayed, but in the end his prognostications will come true. And we already see that we are bumping into limits. After all, the whole climate change issue is a limit of the amount of carbon dioxide that the atmosphere can tolerate before we begin to see dangerous climate change and so on. So there are limits out there, although we may not have bumped into them as quickly as Malthus thought. So upon what could you base the world economy in a way that would be sustainable in the long term? If I knew the answer, I guess I'd be a very rich man, I'd be a very famous person. I don't know what the answer is, but it does seem to me that there have to be alternatives to the system that we have. Now, what you see happening at present is through carbon trading, an attempt to insert into the greed-based economy recognition of the externalities, in this case the cost of carbon. And that might be better than the situation we have now, but I'm dubious that in the long term that will really work. Much better, it seems to me, to control the carbon at source, which is the way that humans have dealt with other problems. It's the logical way to deal with any problem. So, looking at going right back to square one and looking at the fundamentals of what makes people happy, and indeed what doesn't deliver happiness, may be something that requires another big push. Because we already know that once you've got a salary beyond about $10,000 a year, your rate of increase of happiness as a function of further financial return tails off quite quickly. So it does seem to me, in conclusion, that finding new ways of organising society, rewarding people, providing them with not only their material well-being but their spiritual and other well-being, that doesn't require ongoing, as far as we can see, infinite growth in use of material and impact on the world, is the key that we have yet to find. Well, everybody talks about climate change, but climate change is a symptom. It's a symptom of our use of energy. And our use of energy is a symptom of our, as human beings, shaping the world to suit our needs. We have to think of them as material needs. But in the end, there can't be infinite growth of our use of materials. So it does seem to me that the biggest challenge is to find a means of decoupling human happiness and the economy, the way by which we organise and trade amongst ourselves, from the material exploitation of the earth, which in a way, which at present at least, is damaging the life support system that the earth provides to us. So for me, that's it. How can we find a way of organising society that is genuinely sustainable and does not draw down these ecosystem services? And we're way away from that at present.